Alabama. Well, we never did find one, so we went almost to the very tip end, almost to Alaska, to Japan, and came back down the East Coast, and was coming up on. Of course, we had radar on that thing, and all of a sudden, 3 weeks ago, that burned thing started barking, and it's a and it's a.
When I ask you questions, as much as possible, try and repeat my question as the beginning of your answer. In other words, if I say, what's your name? You'll say, my name is, instead of just saying your name. So were you a member of the 509th? Well, I was a member of the 509th in such and such, so that it sounds like a complete sentence. And I'll prod you a little bit if you're not getting the hang of it right at the start, okay? All right?
You want to stick?
No, I think we can find some other way to do that. Are we rolling?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thanks for having us here tonight. And I feel like we're in the presence of somebody who's taken part in something very important in history here.
That's what they gave me that plaque up there for.
Well, we'll have to take a look at that, maybe take a shot of it later. Can you, for our, can you give us your name and tell us what your rank was when you left the service?
My name is F. Kenneth Wey. I was a captain when I left the service in 1952. I was called back in after I was released from World War II in 1947, early 47, and was called back to active duty in 1952 for a year for the Korean War.
When did you go into the service?
Hang on, hang on just a second. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Well,
So when did you go into the service?
In 19... In,
Remember trying to say a whole sentence.
I went on active duty in the service in March of 1942 when my head of my draft board in Chattanooga called me and told me that my number was coming up, and he had made arrangements for me to enlist in the Army Air Corps rather than be inducted into service. So that was the end of my college career. That was right in the middle of my second year at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville.
Did you know how to fly before that, or was that?
Never had flown. I just didn't want to have to be in a mud hole on the ground somewhere. Wanted a bed to sleep in every night was the reason I went in the Air Corps.
And you fought in the war as a pilot?
No, I was probably as a bombardier, navigator, radar operator. And I was trained and received my commission at Bombardier School in Big Spring, Texas on November the 13th, 1943. And from there, I was sent to Colorado Springs for B-24 crew training to go to North Africa. We were there for about 3 months, and on our last mission, which they called a shakedown mission, the next day we would take off and go to North Africa. But on that last mission, just as we started to land, we had 2 outboard engines catch on fire, and we couldn't put the fire out. So the pilot hit the brakes and told us to as soon as they grabbed to jump out the windows of the thing onto the tarmac, and I was wearing a parachute harness. It was so the harness so it wouldn't get in the way. In other words, you just clipped it on just in case you needed it. But I had that harness on, and when I hit the runway, the runway light caught that harness right between my legs and just cut me right half in two, and I had to go in the hospital, and was in the hospital for 7 weeks. The crew, they put another man in my place on the crew. The rest of them were all right. They put another man on my place, and on their first mission when they got to North Africa was Palestia oil field raids, and they were shot down and killed. All of them shot down and killed on the first mission. That was my lucky day when that thing cut me in two. So then they sent me to B-17s in Nebraska, and was assigned to the 393rd Squadron. And we were there about 2 weeks, and the 393rd was selected as the future 509th Composite Group. We were pulled out of there and sent to Wendover, Utah by secret training, and that's where we got our B-29s. They were specially built for us.
Is there a way to give someone who's not a military person
Well,
a lot of searching? So people that will see this don't know, they're not military people, they're, you know, John Q. Public, right?
Right.
So they don't know about the significance of different units and so on and so forth. Is there a way to kind of, for the average person, tell them what was the 509th, what was the purpose of the 509th, or the significance of the 509th?
The 509th had a mission, which is one of a kind. It's the only one that ever was and the only one that ever will be. It was put together specifically to drop an atomic bomb on Japan. But it was highly secret. We were all, every one of us that were in the original 393rd, and any additional men that came into the units. The FBI, and back then was what was OSS, I think, were all run through every check that you could possibly go through for loyalty to the country, and they even, of course, I knew all about all the ones that they had gone to. My home was in Chattanooga, and Dad and his two partners, of course, were closely questioned, and a number of people in Chattanooga, where the man that was the ones who were investigating me went to Chattanooga and questioned all these people and checked up all my background and all. I had it pretty well covered, the things I didn't want them to know, I guess. But it was Wendover, Utah, the air base, had a barbed wire fence around it, just exactly just like you see in war movies, where it's a compound, forms a compound. Nobody could get in, nobody could get out, except through the main gate. And everybody was checked that came off or on that base. And
So it was top secret. It was really high security.
It was the highest security that ever has been.
Did you know what you were being trained for?
No, ma'am. All they told us was that it was top secret. But as time went on in that training, I came home on a leave, and my wife's husband was a scientist at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they manufactured the uranium, purified the uranium.
Enriched?
But he didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't know what I was doing. But we put two and two together that that's what it was going to be, was going to be an atomic bomb. And as it turned out, it did, because we both had to keep our mouths shut and not tell anybody what we were thinking at all.
So the 509th was trained stateside as a unit and then sent to Tinian?
Right. We did all of our training at well, now while we was stationed at Wendover, they sent all 15 crews of us to Batista Field in Havana, Cuba, and we're down there for 6 weeks, flying at just on making long trips over and around the equator because of the weather conditions, the proximity of the two, of going to Tinian and what we could do down in Cuba. That helped us a lot for our flying over the Pacific. And then they sent us to Tinian. Of course, they let us spend 2 nights in Hawaii to have a last fling before we went on to the boondocks. But when we first got to Tinian, we didn't have any bombs. The ship that was what we call the pumpkins, weighed 10,000 pounds. And the ships that were bringing them over there were 3 weeks late getting the bombs to us. So we just flew around on the islands that the Japanese, Japanese troops were still on a lot of those islands over there, and instead of risking American soldiers and sailors going on the islands to get them off, they just blockaded them and just left the Japs in there to starve. And that's what we used as practice bombing. We just used 100-pound bombs just as practice dropping on them. And the only time that we were shot at and almost hit was we was playing around and making a practice bombing mission on Truck Island, of which the Navy guaranteed to us that it was secure and there were no Japs on there. And when, just as I started to release the bombs on Truck Island, all the flak started blowing all around us. The Japs down there were shooting at us. And they just, why they didn't hit us, I don't know. But that's the only time that we ever saw anti-aircraft fire. Because we flew, all our missions were flown at 30,000 feet over Japan.
So how, if I can interrupt a little bit,
Yeah.
How long were you on Tinian? Oops, come here. Come here.
Let's see, we got Tinian in March or April, and after the atom bomb drop on August the 9th, we were there for about another 6 weeks before we came back to the States.
What was your role in the atom bomb drop?
My role in the atom bomb drop was to give the last order to turn the bomb loose. Our plane, the straight flush, was what they called a weather recon plane. I flew 30 minutes ahead of the Enola Gay that had the atom bomb on it. And my job was to fly the exact same route and the aiming point to where the Tom Parabee was. What do you want to do with that?
If you don't mind, the job of your crew and your plane on the atom bomb drop.
We had orders. Baby, go lay down somewhere. I'll tell you what, Mark. Go back there and look under the.
Okay, so let's try from the, would you like a glass of water or
No,
something?
I just got to keep my lips licked.
Oh, okay.
Oh, this medication that I have to take every 4 hours, the doggone stuff. You see my lips look like I've been kissing something for about 6 weeks. And never
Well, I
could
was
get
going to
it where-
ask you about that.
Well, it's sore, it stays sore where that darn medication, it's an aerosol, and it comes out and it makes me, I just end up sometimes with sores on them. It's hell.
Well, if there's any, can we get something for you to, no, to what you're looking? All right, so let's try it from, if you would describe what your role and your crew's role was in the atom bomb drop, and remember to start it as a complete sentence.
We were the weather plane that flew 30 minutes ahead of the Enola Gay that was carrying the first atomic bomb. And my job was to make what we called a dry run, since I was not going to drop a bomb. But I made exactly the same run over the aiming point that Parabby, the bombardier on the atom bomb plane, would drop if the aiming point was clear of clouds and clear enough to where he could get a perfect run on it, so that there would be no mistakes made. So what my job as it ended up when I made that run, I flew over the target heading due west, did 180 degrees and came back over due east to verify my figures on the bomb site. And when I did that, they jived with my original figures on the western heading. And I radioed to Tom Parabby, rather Colonel Tibbetts, the plane commander. I radioed to him that the aiming point was in perfect condition, let her go. So as it ended up, I was the one that gave the final order to drop the atom bomb on Hiroshima. So we got out of there. We left. We had at that time, that was the first time we knew what we had was on that mission. They finally told us that morning at midnight rather, when we were taking off, gave us an idea what it was going to be. That when we were close to it, just to get out and stay out. And Colonel Tibbetts came on in about 35 minutes behind us and let that thing go, and it killed about 200,000 people, which was a better swap than us sending soldiers in to try to take Japan. We'd probably get 2 or 3 million Americans killed.
When did you know how many people had actually died from the bomb?
From it?
Yeah.
Not for years after, because they had no. See, that thing. There's no telling how many degrees of death that the length of times that it took those people to die from that thing. And of course, a big percentage of them were killed immediately and incinerated. They just completely disappeared from the earth when that thing was so hot. But heck, they were still dying 25, 30 years after that was.
So when was the first time that you ever witnessed an atom bomb going off?
The first one I ever witnessed going off was at Bikini. I was far enough away. Now, we were about 35 minutes ahead of the bomb drop itself, and we were hightailing it straight out of there.
This is still at Hiroshima.
At
Hiroshima.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Flying about 280 miles an hour, with 140, 150, 160 miles away from it, you couldn't see a thing. We didn't know anything. Now there was two other airplanes flying with Tibbetts. One was instruments, and one was photography planes flying along with Tibbetts plane. And of course they saw the whole thing. But they had to get out of there in a hurry when that thing went off.
So the first time you ever witnessed an atom bomb?
First time I ever witnessed an atom bomb was the July the 1st bomb drop at Bikini Atoll. After the war was over, that was for the Bikini bomb test. Between old biddies and nosy people.
They want to know what's blazing over here?
Oh, Lord.
Okay, so.
All right, now for it.
Now, okay, so we're at Bikini. What was your mission at Bikini?
My mission at Bikini, we flipped a coin. There were two of us that had dropped the 100-pound practice bomb. There were only two crews of them. Etherly, they kept Major Etherly and I, and Major Rowan and his bombardier. I believe it was Rowan. We were the only four that they brought out of the 509th to drop the bombs at Bikini. The rest of the thing was a staged play, was what it amounted to. Being a year after the war was over, the Air Force was full of West Point graduates that were going to stay in and make careers out of the military. So they showed, instead of bringing in our original 509th to do the bomb testing down there, they just kept the four of us and let all the rest of them go. And so when we got down there, we just, Rowan and I, we just flipped a coin as to see which one of us was going to drop the bomb. And I wish the hell I'd have dropped it instead of having to fly through that confounded cloud, because I've got everything in the world that I've got except pregnancy, and of course that was atom bomb. That would have cured that.
And it would have cured it. Can we go back for a minute to what your actual mission was at Bikini?
All right, when the bomb was dropped, it was in the middle of the afternoon. I forget the time, somewhere around 4 o'clock. He dropped the bomb, and my job then was to circle the aiming point, circle Bikini Island, and of course, we had cameras on board, and they were photographing the doggone things. And then after the explosion, and I saw where it had missed it so doggone far, then we went back to Kwajalein Island. And then, at about dark, along about 8 o'clock, they called us out and gave us another airplane that they had built, what they call precipitrons. They took out the windows in the back of the airplane and did tin work and put in these precipitrons with suction fans on them for us to fly through the cloud and suck in what particles foreign particles that were in that cloud to get samples of it. But just as we got it, we hunted and hunted and hunted. It was darker than daylight. Daylight, that's right. It was so dark you couldn't see the hand in front of your face. So we were just wandering around and wandering around. And me and another man on board had Geiger counters to tell us when we were, if we were in trouble or when we got into the cloud. And all of a sudden, that thing started dancing a jig. I never heard such a racket in my life. I just turned around and told Ed, I said, let's get the hell out of here. And he pushed the nose of that thing right straight down, and we got out. And he called there was another plane that they'd sent up with us, and he radioed them they never had found the cloud, so he told them where it was, and they came on in and took them some samples and got out. And that's when we first really found out what the Dickens radioactivity was. Because when we got back to Kwajalein, they made us park the airplanes out at the far end of the strip, just as far away from civilization as we could get. And they left us out there all night long. And they brought us some water and some food in the Jeeps. But they wouldn't come to where the airplanes were. They'd come within, about 500 feet. And they'd unload on the runway, just put the supplies on the runway, then they'd turn around and go take off and get out of there, go back to civilization. And then sometime, or just before noon the next morning, they came out there with a couple of buses. Got to see, there was, I think there was 22 of us. I believe there was 11 on each plane. And they loaded us up and took us to a barracks. It had been a ward for the hospitals, and they had sealed that thing up tight, lock, stock, and barrel. And they just went off and left the buses out there. We had to drive them into the place. And got there, and we had to get inside. And that's where we stayed for 3 or 4 days while they was checking us out. Said then they said that there wasn't anything wrong with any of us. And I think Etherly was the first one that died with cancer of the throat.
So when you came back to Kwajalein, you landed your planes, the two of you, 2 planes that were collecting particle samples, and you were told to stay on the planes, with the planes, until the following morning?
That's right.
So for about how many hours?
It was from, well, let's see, it was around 8 or 9 o'clock when we flew into the cloud, and they didn't get us off of that runway till about 10 o'clock the next morning.
And
so that's 12, 14 hours.
And what were the men all talking about during that time amongst yourselves?
Wondering what the hell was going on, to tell you the truth. That's all we could do was wonder, because we had no idea, no nothing. We didn't know what the radiation was doing to us or nothing, but we couldn't do a thing in the world about it.
When you were given the orders to go up and collect the particles, were those orders given to you very shortly before you went off to do it?
Yeah.
Was that the first time that you were aware that you would be asked to do something like that?
No, because we had about a dozen planes out there. So didn't know which ones were going to be selected to go do it. So they just selected to it.
So can you put that into a sentence, essentially, that you knew what the nature of the task was going to be and so on?
I knew what the nature of the task was going to be when they told us to take those airplanes with the precipitrons on them, to fly through the cloud and collect particles. But we were assuming that the precipitrons were airtight to where none of it could get loose inside the airplane. But as it happened, it did get loose in the airplane, just filled up the airplane. We might as well not. The only thing the precipitrons ended up doing was sucking the darn stuff in there on us, where it was supposed to contain it in the precipitron itself.
Could you see the particles?
No, I couldn't see what it is. Of course, dark as Dickens. Couldn't see anything.
Could you smell anything? I mean, can you describe for us what it was like, you know, being in the cloud?
It was this, so we couldn't smell anything because we went on oxygen before we started hunting, looking for the cloud. So we couldn't see with those. We were flying. It was flying high, flying around between 25 and 30,000.
Why don't we take a little break? You want to go into the bedroom and
No,
take
I
a
don't
little?
want to take,
No?
No, when I get on that oxygen, at least I like to stay on there for at least an hour when I get on.
Uh-huh.
Just a little shot of it doesn't help anything.
Uh-huh. Doesn't have any effect?
No.
Uh-huh.
Don't need to move, it'll start her off again.
You want to start?
Served honestly, nobody's any more hero than the other one. I just happened to accidentally get a good, well-known job to do. As far as I'm concerned, that's it.
If we go back to Operation Crossroads, when the bomb went off, you were up in the air?
Yeah.
Can you just think for a minute and try and give us a sense of what it was like inside that plane when the bomb went off? And I'm thinking of, what people said, what it sounded like, what it looked like.
Well,
If you could tell that again, starting with a complete sentence, a complete thought.
With the explosion of the bomb, airdrop bomb.
Let's
Uh,
can we try that again?
yeah,
Just wanna-
Bibby,
Come here, you.
get over there with Mark.
Can you
Go over and pee
occupy?
on Mark's leg. There's a good place to start.
Oh, now she's decided she likes me.
Why don't you go pee on your leg?
Come on, come on. Come on, it's okay. Okay, let's try this again. Maybe she'll stay on the couch. So we were talking about what happened when you were in the aircraft and the bomb went off.
We had orders on the July the 1st when the bomb was dropped. We had orders and were given goggles, thick, dark goggles to wear, so when the explosion from the bomb would be so bright that it wouldn't damage your eyes. And it was not only the ones of us who was flying, it was also there were ships ringing Bikini Atoll of onlookers and high military brass that just wanted their names in the paper. But when it did explode, I guess we were 5 miles from it. And it was a glare that even goggles couldn't hide it. It was real sharp, but it happened in such a split second that we didn't, it was hazy for a few minutes, but not long. But it got up to, we kept circling it until it got up to about 30,000 feet. And it kept going on up to about 40,000 feet. And the winds got a hold of it. And it blew it in exactly the opposite direction of where it was predicted by the weather people out there where it was going to go. And that's what caused us and gave us the problem of finding the cloud. So by then it was dark and it was, we had problems finding the cloud because we didn't know which direction it had gone, and neither did the weather people. But it was turned out it was the exact opposite direction of where they had predicted.
When the bomb exploded, did the men in the ship yell, or did they say anything, or?
Well, when that thing exploded, of course, we were all looking out the windows at it. But it was so phenomenal that to begin with, you just mum. You didn't know what to say or what to do. But of course, and then when the pressure from the bomb hit the airplane, it was just like a giant hand coming out of nowhere and just slapping up the side of the plane. But it didn't. That's one reason we were 5 miles away from it. It didn't do any damage to the plane.
And what was the reaction of the people inside the plane when the shock wave hit?
Well, we were all looking down at that water trying to find ships was the biggest thing was what we were trying to do. And since it didn't hit where it should, it didn't damage any, to any extent, didn't damage any large ships, like the underwater blast did. When the underwater blast, it stood those huge big ships, submarines and warships and all. They just stood upright, just like they're standing on their tail, walking around with it. Now, that was a sight to behold. We had a lot of conversation out of that. But that ship would just turn straight up, big aircraft carrier, just turn straight up on its tail, and all of a sudden it would go down and it'd just go out of sight right under the water.
How long did you stay near the cloud when it first happened?
At the time of explosion,
Yeah.
we didn't hang around there for, I guess 30 or 40 minutes looking to see how high it was going to go before the winds carried it, so we'd know what direction it was going to go in. And that's where when we left there, it still hadn't settled on any direction. It was still going up.
So you were just circling for 30 or 40 minutes
Yeah.
while that was happening?
Yeah.
And, all right, so you returned to Kwajalein.
Went back to Kwajalein.
Time went by, and then they sent you out.
We did nothing. We played poker. Booked and I won a lot of money. And of course, we did the whole time we were over there before. Here you go.
All right, so when we got a little disjointed here. You've already told the story about going up and going through the cloud, about coming back, about being quarantined for 3 days. Prior to the bomb explosion, when you were going through preparations, what were you trained or taught about radioactivity or any of the things that might happen as a result of the bomb being exploded?
You mean, what you are asking me is what we would do if the bomb explosion had some ill effect on the airplane we were flying?
No, I'm asking what you were told about radiation or about what might be a byproduct of the explosion or anything that you needed to know in terms of your own concerns for safety. And again, if you could put this in a...
prior to the explosion of the bomb of Hiroshima, we knew absolutely nothing. But after the explosion, we were well informed and given lectures and all. In fact, Bill Lawrence, who was the science editor for the New York Times, he and I got to be real close friends. There was 3 famous scientist editors and all out there for that they had brought out there to write all that up when we exploded that bomb.
When you say that you didn't know anything before, you obviously you had goggles when you went up for the flight. So it sounds like there was...
We didn't have goggles on the first flight on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The only place we had goggles was at Bikini Bomb Test.
Okay, so I'm inquiring about
In other words,
Bikini.
it sounds like it kind of sounds like they were keeping it secret. They didn't give us all that equipment because they was keeping it secret from us, because they knew, bound to have known on the test explosions in New Mexico, that there's going to have the light and the heat and the force.
But for Bikini, when you were out there preparing before the test was done of Abel and Baker, what were you told about radiation, or what to watch out for, or things like that?
We got no further instructions at all,
Can you put
other
that
than what we had already had at Tinian.
Tinian. Can you put that in a sentence? And I want to remind you about the goggles, because it sounds like they told you something, because you were given some equipment to take up with you, however limited it was. So I just want to remind you of that, so that if there are any little things that they might have told you about radiation, I want to be sure that we're giving you an opportunity to to recall them and include them. That's
Oh, the only instructions that we received from the intelligentsia about what radiation does, what it is, and what it does, and what it can cause, was told to us after the Hiroshima bomb drop. We received no other further instructions. When we went to Bikini, all we received were goggles and earplugs, and that was the only protection that we received. In addition, it was the only knowledge of anything that they gave us to protect ourselves from radiation.
Did you start to worry about that at any point?
The only time that I really worried about it was when Etherly died of throat cancer.
When did that happen?
And that happened, let's see, Buck's been dead since the early, let's see, about 57, 58.
So that was pretty
So
soon.
that was pretty close to, that's within about 10 to 12 years.
So Buck was your pilot.
Uh-huh.
Can you state that? Buck was the, can you make a sentence out of that? Buck was the pilot of the...
Buck Etherly was, Major Buck Etherly was my pilot. And he and I had flown all the way off for the 3 years, the whole time that the 509th had been in existence. And we were kept in for the Bikini bomb test. And after he wanted to stay in as a regular Air Force, and was turned down for health reasons, of which I never could understand why they could have turned him down. But they did, and he had to go, of course, back into the public, as like I wanted to and did. But then we corresponded. Then he was living in Houston, Texas, and he was having throat trouble. He got to where he couldn't talk, and they kept telling him he had a cancer, but they never could find it and cure it. And he finally died of they called it cancer of the throat. But that got me to worrying, because it wasn't long after that I had to have a gallbladder surgery. And I had read somewhere, it was from a letter from atomic veterans that had been radiated. And one of the most important things that it did was, the prominent things that it did, was to get into your gallbladder, and you'd have to have that surgery on it. And that's what got me interested in the darn thing. And then, darn if it wasn't, 3 years later, I had to have my gallbladder removed. I didn't wish it on myself. It was just happened to be there.
So you were worried, but did you go any further with that? Did you make any inquiries or
Yeah,
talk
I had correspondence with the with the with the outfit in headquarters was in San Francisco on radiation with radiation victims, and but
Okay. We all know.
So we were talking about after your gallbladder surgery. I asked, what did you kind of just forget about your worries after
no,
that?
I didn't forget about it, but I went ahead and joined up with that outfit out of California that were radiation victims. The radiation victims came from a lot of places other than the bomb dropping. They came from Oak Ridge, from employees at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and also in Hanford, Washington, where they worked with the stuff up there. And then the sheep herders in Utah, where it was all cut loose out there. And there are thousands and thousands of people in these United States that have been irradiated and they don't know it.
So you learned about more of these cases as a
Yeah.
result of the information that was
But the
available.
big thing we learned was that along about that same time, they had the Agent Orange problem, where the United States denied any responsibility for it. And they pushed off on us, all the radiation victims, the same thing. They even went so far, now you read in the newspaper there where I flew through that cloud. But they claim it didn't happen. It's actually written up that we didn't fly through no damn cloud. That's the way to get out of it.
Have you tried to make claims for medical expenses or what? Can you
Just
tell us?
nothing. I haven't made no move whatsoever until there's enough of them working on it, until the United States government makes a move. Can't do anything. And the Veterans Administration, they are trying their best, and the VFW and the American Legion, they are all working on it, and been working on it now for 50 years, so what do you expect? There's no sense in me worrying myself about it, because I'm not going to get anything.
Did anything else happen to you besides the gallbladder that you think is related to what your experience in the service?
My lung problem could be. They calling it emphysema, but it could well be related to the radiation.
How long have you suffered with the lung problem?
Ever since the war was over. I never had it before that. But they are hollering now, that's cigarettes cause that.
Did you keep in touch with any of the other men who participated in Operation Crossroads with you?
Oh yeah, I've got a real close friend. He's a hell of a nice boy. He was a sergeant on my plane. Mort, what's Mort's last? I don't even know what my last name is right now. But anyway, he was a sergeant on my plane. He's been through here. He lives in San Diego. And he's been through here 3 times. He's got some family that lives in New York, and he always stops by and visits with us a few days. And then he's the only one on the crew that we had at Bikini. I mean, stay in touch with all of them on the Hiroshima mission, original 509.
And on Operation Crossroads, do you know anything about the health condition of other people who were on your crew?
Nobody was there. The ones that I did know pretty well, they did. They were high-ranking officers that were in there.
So then what you're saying is that the people who The people who were on Operation Crossroads all kind of went your separate ways?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah,
put that in a
they were
complete thought?
scattered from all over, drug in from all over everywhere, and then went back from their origin.
Can you, I'm sorry to ask you to do it again. Can you do it again and include Operation Crossroads so that we know you're identifying that the men from Operation Crossroads who you worked with are who you're referring
Oh, I
to?
do. You mean I keep in touch all the time, and have all these years with the original crews that I had with in the 509th and the atomic bomb droppings on Japan. Uh, but there's only one on my that I had on the crew at Bikini that I got close to, and we didn't fly together for about 6 or 7 months. But he lives in San Diego and has family in New York, and he's been stopped through here 3 different times and visits with us for a few days at a time.
Okay. Thank you. Torturing
What the hell
you.
she thinks she's supposed to be a director or a writer?
I just want to see. Let's see.
She told you what her last name spells backwards, didn't she?
Yeah, you came up with that, didn't you?
And I just happened to look down that piece of paper and said, on a limb, I ain't know she's on a limb.
I'm on a limb. When you think back on, well, actually, you ever think about Bikini in those days when you were there for Operation Crossroads?
Say it again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was speaking a little too fast. Do you ever think back upon the days when you were participating in Operation Crossroads and the camaraderie or the friends that you made there or what it was like?
Well, when I got to Bikini, I found out right off of the bat why they were on the 4 bus out of the 509th that they brought in to do the dropping. Because everybody else that was in there were high-ranking West Point graduates that were looking for a future. And all they were pencil pushers, and practically none of them knew how to play poker. So that made Etherly and I something to do all the time, and that was fleecing those ducks. General Roger Ramey got and what I mean by when I say fleecing, that means he and I were not in cahoots with each other to rub one off. We just won it by knowing how to play poker. But Roger Ramey got a $10,000 check after the war, after the drops, for writing an article letting them use his name in Time magazine about the Bikini bomb tests. I think that check lasted just about 3 hours. And I've never in my life, and he was a 3-star general, and not he had even got an air base in Cuba somewhere down there named for him. But he sure didn't know how to play poker, but he sure didn't know how to lose money.
You know, you made me think of something else that we talked about on the phone. I asked you whether or not, after you got out of the service, was there ever any medical follow-up on you or your health?
After I left the service, there was never the first time that the government has ever come to me about anything, other than when the idiots recalled me in 1952 to go on active duty for the Korean War. And I had the hardest one-man job that there was during the Korean War. They sent me through a refresher school at Waco, Texas for radar training and to fly B-47s. I got down to Randolph Field, Texas for staging, and I went, when I checked in, I went right straight to the commanding general down there and explained to him, which I had been griping for 6 months, that I was still considered a security risk because of what I knew about the atomic bombs. And that I could not leave, I was under orders, and I could not even go to Mexico on a visit. I could not leave the United States. So he said, well, I'll see, well, check into that and find out about it for you. Well, I had already, by then General Tibbets was in the Pentagon, and I had called him, and he was trying to get the paperwork through to get me out. So after I'd been at Randolph Field for about 4 weeks, the general called me in. He said, well, you're not going to go overseas. But said it's going to take a while to get this paperwork through and get you out of here. Said, I've got to put you to work. And he says, you play golf? I said, yeah, I've always played par golf. He said, now you're the pro at the golf course here on Randolph Field. I ended up spending 8 months at that golf course teaching Wax and everybody else, and most of them were high-ranking officers' wives out there, teaching them how to play golf, and that's the way I fought the Korean War. I was surprised they didn't give me a medal for it.
You probably deserved one from your description.
One.
You told me something about a questionnaire that you got from the government, though, at some point regarding your health or regarding.
The government after that outfit in California, after I joined that thing, the Veterans Administration sent me out a questionnaire as to what all was wrong with me, and no, that's not the way to put it. They put on there a list of things that the government considered could be detrimental to my health caused by radiation, and asked me, did I have any of those conditions? And there wasn't but one condition on there that they had, and I was to check them off and send them back to them. And the only one condition I would have was my breathing. And I sent that in, and that was the end of it. Never heard another thing out of it.
Didn't you get a questionnaire about asking whether or not you had any children or something at some point?
Well, that was part of that questionnaire. If you had, did you have any deformed children? And do you have any? Have you had any stillbirths?
Okay, so can you put that?
That was part of the in that list of things that could be wrong.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this was not a follow-up from the U.S. government on atomic veterans. It was a private survey from the organization that you joined. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. I misunderstood you when you told me about that. Would you go back and visit Bikini now, if you were able to?
I wouldn't go on that darn thing for nobody. Not if they haven't removed all the soil and all from it. It's bound to be still contaminated.
Do you feel like when you were in the service, what happened to you was a result of people not knowing the dangers, and you, unfortunately, were one of the people who suffered an exposure such as you did?
You're asking me if I had known what the ill effects of radiation were to a person, would I have ever let myself be involved in it? Is that what you're asking me?
No. I'm asking you whether you think that what happened to you was a result of carelessness, was a result of ignorance, just not knowing the luck of the draw. You must have thought this over in your lifetime as you've, concerned yourself with your health and your thoughts about what happened to you.
All these things have happened to me. I have never been informed enough to know what could cause them. And I have no idea, it's entirely possible that me having 4 heart attacks in 6 months could have something to do with that, but it might have kept me alive instead of going ahead and let me go with 1 heart attack. Now, I do know one thing that sure could be caused by it. I only had, when I had that first heart attack, of course I had a pulmonary surgeon there was checking my lungs and blood. I only have 28% of the amount of oxygen in my blood that I'm supposed to have. And when you're in that condition, see, they couldn't even do that arteriogram where they go in there and clean out those clogged arteries. I cannot be put to sleep at all under any condition, and I cannot have any surgery where I'm at all because of bleeding. My blood is so thin. Girl, little girl, you got more mouth than the baboons got rear end.